9 people were murdered in the Claudy bombings in 1972. Their killers have never been caught. Now we know that senior figures in the RUC, the government and the Catholic Church ensured that a key suspect, a priest, was moved over the border and out of the reach of detectives who wanted to arrest and question him. Today's Police Ombudsman's report said police commanders had asked the NIO for help in dealing with Father James Chesney's alleged involvement. This had compromised the murder investigation and was a collusive act. And that despite all the intelligence and information pointing to Father Chesney, senior police had not followed possible lines of inquiry. This, said the report, was a potential criminal offence. The Cardinal, the Chief Constable and Conservative Secretary of State, who have questions to answer, are all now dead. So we are left with the question, why did they act as they did?
This sculpture, a study in individual grief, commemorates that awful day, the 31st of July 1972, when 3 car bombs ripped apart this quiet County Londonderry village of Claudy. 9 people were killed, Protestants and Catholics. 30 more were hurt. The youngest victim was 8-year-old Catherine Eakin. She was cleaning the windows of the family grocery store when the first bomb exploded. The others who died were Joseph McCluskey, David Miller, James McClelland, William Temple, Elizabeth McElhinney, Rose McLaughlin, Patrick Connolly and Arthur Hone. No warnings and no group ever said they had done it. No one has ever been charged with the bombings. But no one doubts the IRA was responsible, and a priest, Father James Chesney, has long been suspected of playing a key role in the planning. Today, the Police Ombudsman's report said the police, the Catholic Church and the government conspired to cover up the suspected role of Father Chesney in this, one of the worst atrocities of the Troubles. We begin our coverage with this report from Julian O'Neill.
The Ombudsman's report cast light on a dark day, exposing a cover-up between church and state. 3 no-warning bombs in July 1972 killed 9 people and injured more than 30.
This 8-year investigation by the Ombudsman found no evidence that the bombings themselves could have been prevented. Investigators looked at old police files, and what they revealed is a belief held by the RUC that Father James Chesney was the IRA's Director of Operations in South Derry, allegedly responsible for bombings and other incidents.
But the priest was never questioned and the investigation compromised. The Ombudsman's office spoke to a former Special Branch detective who had wanted Father Chesney arrested, but the move was blocked by his boss, the Assistant Chief Constable. The ACC had written to the Northern Ireland office wondering what action to take, only to be told that the then Secretary of State, Willie Whitelaw, had already met Cardinal William Conway to discuss the possibility of transferring Father Chesney to Donegal. The Ombudsman came to Claudy with his findings, telling families of the deal which relocated Father Chesney in 1973.
Their motivations will never be known, and whether or not lives were saved or whether or not this was a proper course of action really will be a matter for others to debate. But it really does, on the part of church and state, come down to the rightness and the morality of the decisions they took, not a matter of criminality.
For the families, the report did not bring closure, but prompted many questions.
When I heard that Father Chesney continued his IRA activities after he was moved to Donegal, that's an absolute disgrace. If he had been arrested and due process had taken place, people would have lived in this country, they wouldn't be injured, families wouldn't have lost people. It's an absolute outrage.
Brendan O'Neill lost his aunt in the bombings. He says today shows just how flawed the initial investigation had been.
Well, I think that, that the RUC had, that I think they didn't properly investigate this for whatever reason between the Catholic Church and the government with that. But I think the RUC should have had some more people to come for questioning.
Mass was said in the local Catholic Church, led by a bishop shocked at a priest's alleged role in the IRA.
to find that a priest was alleged to have been an active member in that movement is certainly of great shame and disappointment and annoyance to the church.
It would appear, because of his calling and his occupation, every step was taken to ensure that he didn't face trial, rather than that he did. And the first port of call should have been a judge, jury, and a prosecution.
One theory for the cover-up is that the arrest of a priest could have inflamed violence. Father Chesney had always denied involvement in any IRA activity to his fellow clergy. He died in 1980, perhaps taking with him Claudy's chance for justice. Julian O'Neill, BBC Newsline, Claudy.
We'll hear more reaction in a moment, but first let's just reflect on the events of that day, the 31st of July 1972. Remember that it took place against a background of severe violence across Northern Ireland, and on the same day as a security operation, Operation Motorman, to free up no-go areas, as they were called, in Londonderry and in Belfast. The first bomb exploded outside McElhenny's pub. The second car bomb was discovered by police near the post office. People were being moved towards the Beaufort Hotel when a third device there exploded. It was the worst year of the Troubles. 1972 is remembered for Bloody Sunday, but in that year nearly 500 people lost their lives. And July was one of the bloodiest months, when almost 100 died, including the 9 here in Claudy.
How peaceful and pretty if the moment could stop.
The song describes the events of that day and tells what the victims were doing when the bombs ripped through their village.
His wife is outside serving petrol, and then a child takes a cloth to a big window pane.
As the decades have passed, the relatives' demand for answers has grown in strength. They say they have the same right as the families of the Bloody Sunday victims to find out what happened to their loved ones. 2 months after the £195 million Saville inquiry report was published, the Police Ombudsman has completed this 8-year investigation, which may finally answer some of their questions.
Meanwhile to Dungiven the killers have gone, and they're finding it hard to get through on the phone.
Well, joining me now, Ivan Cooper, who was the MP for the area in 1972, and Mary Hamilton, who was injured in the bomb which exploded outside her hotel on that day. Mary, you still carry the wounds from that day. You said to me today it felt like you were going to a funeral when you woke up this morning. How do you feel now towards the end of this day?
Well, it's been a long day and we've had a lot of talking, but I just feel there's a lot of things a lot of questions we haven't had answered. I know the report today was to do with the findings of the police service, the church and the government, and also an investigation of Father Chesney, but I feel that there's no closure for the families at the minute.
No sense of relief, no sense of recognition. You've always said you felt like you were the forgotten victims.
Well, it still feels like that, and the families are still looking today for some more inquiries. I think the people would need to complain if they have any more information or any documents, bring them forward. And also, there's people in government today who were very much involved years ago in the 70s. They would know a lot of information. They all should come forward and tell the truth.
But
because
today is a start of some kind for you.
We feel that this would be a start that maybe we'll get going forward.
Ivan Cooper, you long felt from the very early days that Father Chesney was involved in this. Do you think this report goes far enough?
Well, yes, I think the report is an extremely important report. Don't forget that I named Father Chesney publicly, that he was involved in the IRA, and I make no apology for that. Can I remind you some of the people who were killed? Artie Hone, and before there was any talk of reconciliation or anything or hands across the border, Artie Hone used to play he was a Catholic who played in the Presbyterian Hall, and I remember the Reverend Moorhead used to introduce him.
But do you feel that, I mean, Mary says that it's just not enough, this report. Do you feel that realistically any more will happen?
I doubt if realistically any more will happen, because I think the majority of the people who were involved in this event on that particular day are all living either in America or they're dead, someone of the two.
So, Mary, realistically, Ivan says not much more is likely to happen on this. What's your view?
Well, probably that is the truth, but we try not to think that's going to happen. We're just still hopeful. But I just feel that there should be some investigation into Father Chesney, because 9 lives were sacrificed to protect a Catholic priest.
And will you go to bed tonight a little relieved?
No, I'm very depressed tonight, because I just feel, and I feel we should have had some more information. We thought we would today, and really, as Ivan says, I don't think it's going to happen.
Mary Hamilton, Ivan Cooper, thank you both very much indeed.
Sinn Féin say the deaths in Claudy were wrong and should not have happened, but that there's no evidence the IRA was responsible. They say what is required is an independent international truth commission, which all those involved in the conflict could take part in. The party spokesperson on Truth, Francie Malloy, was asked by our political correspondent Gareth Gordon if this was a day when Republicans were hanging their heads in shame.
No, because I don't think anybody's very clear what the results of this will be, because we have a very clear report which is condemning the RUC investigation. And this is an investigation into the RUC's investigation tactics over the years. And the report is very clearly a damning report to those investigations.
Well, the RUC did not plant the bomb. Most people think that was the IRA. Do you accept that?
No, I don't, because I don't know any more than you know who actually did carry out this particular bombing. It has to be condemned, because this particular attack was on the civilian population of Claudy.
But who else would have planted the bomb? I mean, the IRA in the past have planted bombs in which civilians have died. For example, Bloody Friday around the same time as this. Yes, but
they owned up to any of the particular attacks that actually they carried out. There were also other agencies involved at different times in carrying out attacks, and the IRA were blamed several times for attacks that turned out not to be involved in.
So you don't necessarily believe this was the IRA?
Well, I don't know, and like others are speculating on what actually did happen. But what we have clearly here is an investigation into those investigations carried out by the RUC. Those investigations failed the people of Claudy and didn't turn up results.
Most people are asking why the Sinn Féin leadership is not speaking today.
Well, I am the spokesperson on behalf of Sinn Féin on the Truth Commission, on the victims, and have been over the years dealing with these type of situations. So that's my reason for actually speaking out today on behalf of Sinn Féin.
In a statement this afternoon, the PSNI said they recognise that opportunities to arrest and interview all of the suspects were not taken in 1972. They said they accepted that more could and should have been done at the time. And they point out that the investigation is now under the remit of the Historical Inquiries team. A former RUC officer who was a young constable at the time of the bombings says the level of violence was so high then that the truth could have plunged Northern Ireland into civil war.
The investigating officers would have been to some extent betrayed by the decision of the senior officers, as were the families of the dead who didn't achieve justice. But at the same time, I certainly can understand the context in which that decision was made, because there was a very real fear of civil war, and this would have been absolutely incendiary information to put into the mix.
With me is the Secretary of State, Owen Paterson. The actions of the Secretary of State at the time, Willie Whitelaw, and the NIO prevented justice being carried out. Was that unjustified and unjustifiable?
I said this afternoon I thought it was wrong, and I've apologised profoundly on behalf of the government to the families and the relatives who lost victims in this appalling atrocity. But I think, as your reports have shown, we do have to look back an extraordinary, difficult, dangerous period. It was the most murderous month of the most murderous year. And it is difficult for us, I think, in 2010, where Northern Ireland has moved on such a long way, to imagine just how fraught the atmosphere was then and the difficulties of making decisions.
But effectively what they did was pervert the course of justice, which is a criminal offence.
Well, the Ombudsman said actually he didn't believe that any minister or official took an action with criminal intent. But you're quite right, it is wrong that this man, who allegedly was involved in this appalling massacre, did not go through due process. That is wrong. And that's why I've apologised profoundly this afternoon to the families involved.
We heard Mary Hamilton there, looking for more, looking for officials that were there at the time to give more evidence, to say what they know. We know that 2 NIO ministers are still alive today. Is it not time then for the government to have a specific inquiry into its actions?
Well, we made available all our records to the Ombudsman. He spent 8 years on this. He's a very distinguished, well-respected policeman, long-standing. The RUC records were made available. And what worries me now about these calls for inquiry is that the key players, tragically, are now dead. I'm not quite sure who would be interrogated by this inquiry. There is one group of people who could perhaps come forward, and they must not be forgotten today with all this concentration on mistakes and wrongdoing perhaps by the government, and that is the paramilitaries. There may be people alive today who were involved in paramilitarism. This was not a one-man band that set off 3 bombs in Claudy and murdered 5 Catholics and 4 Protestants. Now perhaps they could come forward with information which could bring some relief to the families.
Okay, Secretary of State, thank you for joining us this evening.
A former bishop of Derry says he had no idea of the intelligence assessment of Father Chesney's involvement with the South Derry Brigade of the IRA. Bishop Edward Daly interviewed Father Chesney in 1974. That's after the priest had moved from Balachi to Donegal. And he said he formed the impression of him that he was a strong and indiscreetly vocal Republican, but not that he was responsible for what the allegations were saying. Bishop Daly says he has real trouble agreeing with or accepting the findings of the Ombudsman's report.
I formulate my view from my interviews of the man, of my memories of the individual. And whilst I acknowledge that he was a very strong supporter of the Republican movement, I still have great difficulties in accepting that he was actively involved in any paramilitary activity.
Although there's evidence that in a conversation between William Whitelaw and Cardinal Conway spoke of a bad man. We know he's a bad man.
Yes, well, if you present anybody with all that stuff, surely he would. I don't think Cardinal Conway, quite frankly, would say a bad man. I think that's more Whitelaw's language. He certainly would have been pleased by it, anyhow, and he'd be very depressed by what he saw, that a priest would be involved in activities of that kind. And moving somebody to Donegal, it's not like moving somebody to Siberia or the South Pacific or somewhere where they're out of reach. He was always at any time within reach of the police in Northern Ireland, the RUC. I'm quite sure if the police had come to me at the time and said, look, we want to interview this guy, where is he, how can we contact him, I certainly would have seen to it that even in that atmosphere that he would have to answer for.
You think it would have been better had he been arrested?
Of course it would.
And questioned?
For a start, I think it was a grave injustice to the victims of Claudy, the fact that he wasn't arrested. I think that it was the ultimate injustice. And I think they have every right to feel grossly offended and overlooked and undervalued, perhaps. I hope this report is a staging that their real suffering will be more widely appreciated. And hopefully too, although I wouldn't be too hopeful about this, some of those who were involved, the only certainty is that if Chesney was involved, he wasn't alone in his involvement, that some of the others will emerge and come to the police or some other authorities and admit to the atrocity that they've been involved in.
The former Bishop of Derry, Edward Daly. Well, as we prepare to leave Claudy for this evening, let's remember that this day has brought back very painful memories for the survivors and for the families of the victims. Julian Fowler has spent some time with one man whose family have been looking for justice for the last 38 years.
8-year-old Catherine Eakin was the youngest victim of the Claudy bomb. Her parents Merle and Billy Eakin led a long campaign to find the truth about what happened. In 2002, they welcomed the start of the Ombudsman's investigation.
Absolutely delighted that after 30 years we're now going to get maybe see justice done here, and hopefully and the man or men brought to justice that were responsible for the murder of Catherine and 8 other people, all innocent families and all going about their daily work that day.
But neither Catherine's mother or father would see her killers brought to justice. Both have now passed away. Today her brother returned to the spot where his sister was killed.
We're standing here now exactly roughly where Catherine was on a small kitchen still cleaning what was then. There was 2 big massive windows in the front of the shop here. She was cleaning this one directly in front of me, sort of thing. I passed her at that point, as I said earlier there, and I had got here to the corner of the gateway. I was about to turn the gateway whenever she landed here, just on the opening of the gateway. She was blowing off the stills with the bomb which had gone off outside what is now Dan's, at the entry where McElhenny's at the petrol pumps, right directly behind the car that Catherine McElhenny was filling with petrol. God rest her, because she got an awful deal. So the thing's a disgrace.
He says the Ombudsman's report raises more questions than answers.
That somebody actually stood up and said yes, the government did let the man off the hook. The Catholic Church knew about him, the RUC knew about him, the British government knew about him. From what I can gather, they had one reference on the thing which I picked up on there was a thing between the Cardinal and William Whitelaw, was that would explain the traces in the boot of the car. I asked the question then up in the meeting there, what were the traces in the boot of the car, to which I was given the answer, they were explosives. Now this was discovered after the Claudy bombing, not just immediately after it, but maybe some time after it. They'd brought in, or somebody had checked his car and found traces of explosives in the car. What I want to know is, at that point, why was he not arrested? If they couldn't arrest him before, if they hadn't enough information, they say they hadn't enough information to actually prosecute him, but they certainly had enough to arrest him and question him. They didn't even do that then. But then, surely when you find explosives in the boot of somebody's car, or traces of them, you would think that the normal run of procedure would be to bring them, at least arrest them and question them. But obviously, for whatever reasons, somebody didn't want him arrested.
Father Chesney died in 1980, but do you still feel that there is a chance that the relatives can see somebody who was responsible, one of the other bombers responsible, brought to justice?
Oh, definitely, because there's definitely still people that were involved in Claudy alive. Like, there's no way they're all dead. It couldn't be that convenient for them. You know, what I'm asking today is, if anybody knows any information or has any wee tidbit, it doesn't matter how small, to let the police have it, please. Also, if there's anybody out there who's directly involved in Claudy bombing, who's maybe now feeling a wee bit guilty and would like to make their peace before they go to see God, because if they don't, they're going the other way, and they deserve that. They deserve to banish in hell. You have your chance now to step forward, be a man, not the courage you were that day in Claudy when you killed innocent people. Like, you just walked in, planted 3 bombs, you could see the people there, you saw the faces of the people that were going to get blown to bits. I hope you still remember those faces.
Mark Eakin talking to Julian Fowler.